Eliza hadn't returned to Bourne since the day she left without a goodbye, but her name had been working overtime behind her back. The voicemail had been playing in her mind since sunrise, looping calmly like someone reading the weather. Hi, Ms. Wren. This is Mitch from the county clerk's office. We're finalizing the Wren Ranch parcel sale. Just need your signature. We've already got the other 3. The cup of coffee on her table had gone cold by the 3rd replay, but she didn't bother asking for a refill. She sat at a corner booth in Luella's diner, its green vinyl seats cracked with age and familiar squeaks, the kind she remembered from Sunday pancakes and after-church pie. She stared at the documents she'd pulled up on her tablet, cross-referencing dates, names, parcel numbers. There it was in digital ink, Eliza May. Wren neatly typed under a signature line she had never touched. She folded her napkin, placed a crumpled $5 bill beneath it, more than enough for the untouched coffee, and slid out of the booth. The waitress behind the counter gave her a distracted half-smile. "Y'all have a nice day, hon." Outside late September, light fell through the oak trees, warm and low. The wind lifted fallen leaves and spun them into brittle spirals along the sidewalk. Bourne hadn't changed much. New boutiques had crept into Main Street, but the bones were the same stone buildings, red clay roofs, and a certain kind of quiet pride that hummed through town like a hymn you didn't forget. The county clerk's office sat between a feed store and the post office. The air inside smelled like paper warmed by sunlight. Mitch looked up from his desk as the door jingled open.
"Well now, if it isn't Miss Eliza."
He stood, smiling wide beneath his silver mustache.
"You've been missed."
"Hi, Mitch," she said, soft but steady. "Hear about the land?" "Huh?"
"Knew you'd be pleased it's moving right along. Not often a family can wrap things up this smooth."
Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Could I see the documents?" Of course," he typed with 2 fingers, humming as he pulled up the digital files. "There we are, 4 listed names. Your folks, Grant Breyer and you." The notary scanned everything in on Tuesday. She leaned forward as he turned the screen toward her. It was all there. The deed transfer, the contract of sale, the tax deferment forms. Every page bore her name, and on 2 of them her signature. "Except it wasn't hers, Mitch," she said carefully. "I didn't sign any of this?" He blinked. "You didn't?" "No." He frowned, but only slightly. "Must be some mix-up. They said you were looped in from the start. Co-trustee, wasn't it?" "I stepped out of the trust 4 years ago." Voluntarily. His brows lifted.
"Well, now that changes things. I'll need a printed copy." Sure.
He clicked the mouse, and the printer buzzed to life behind him. "Just a formality." "I'm sure." She didn't answer. Back in her car, the documents warm in her lap, she stared ahead for a long moment, then she turned off Main and took the familiar winding road toward the family ranch. The gate still bore the wrought iron W, flanked by brittle yucca. The gravel crunched under her tires, the way it always had. Her chest tightened as the house came into view, freshly painted tidy, but not hers. Not anymore. The porch sagged slightly in the same corner. It always had. The swing hung there, still swaying in the wind, letting out the soft, rhythmic squeak that once lulled her to sleep on lazy summer afternoons. She knocked. 3 heartbeats later, the door opened. Clay. Wren stood in the frame like he'd never moved. His button-down was ironed, his face unreadable. "Eliza," he said. "Not warm? Not cold? Just a name, Dad." He stepped aside without another word. She entered the house like a stranger. shoes tapping soft on old wood. The living room still smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. Virginia sat straight-backed on the settee, her hands folded over her lap, pearls nestled beneath the collar of her blouse. Grant lounged in a chair like he owned the air, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling his phone. Briar perched by the window picture-perfect in a cream sweater, her hair styled as if expecting cameras.
"Well," said Virginia after a pause. "This is unexpected. I just came from Mitch's office."
Eliza dropped the folder on the coffee table. "You used my name."
Grant didn't look up. "Technically, it was on file. You were on the trust. I removed myself. Things change."
Briar offered her voice as smooth as silk.
"You've been gone a long time. We had to move forward."
"You forged my signature." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Virginia said softly. "It's not like you were going to do anything with it." "You mean I wasn't useful?" Eliza said. Her father remained silent. She turned to him.
"Did you know?"
He met her gaze without blinking. "You're not part of this family anymore. You chose that." She breathed in through her nose. "Then stop using my name." Silence blanketed the room like a curtain falling after a bad play. Outside, the swing groaned in the breeze, and the wind kicked up dry leaves that scuttled across the porch like whispers. Eliza reached into her bag, drew out her phone, and snapped a photo of the document lying open on the table. The shutter clicked once. "I'll be in touch," she says, turning away as the wind lifts dry leaves across the porch. Not everything buried is forgotten, especially if it's filed under land use codes. The courthouse in Bourne hadn't changed since Eliza interned there during undergrad, a building that carried its age like a well-folded quilt. Its sandstone walls radiated faint heat from the morning sun, while the lobby air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old upholstery. Her boots clicked over the cracked flagstones, echoing briefly under the arched ceiling. No security gate, no metal detector, just a bronze plaque near the entrance that read, "Justice is local." At the reception window, Clerk Sarah glanced up from her magazine and blinked in surprise. "Eliza." "Wren, is that you?" Eliza smiled. "Still filing things by hand, only the ones that matter." Sarah's eyes crinkled. "You doing okay, hon? I'm getting there." She slid a slip of paper across the counter, looking for original filings tied to the Wren Ranch Trust Parcel, AA. Sarah tapped a few keys. Her fingernails painted a dull coral.
"Oof, this one goes back a ways."
"You'll want the archive's basement second shelf from the vault wall." Eliza thanked her and descended the stairs, the cool air wrapping around her like old water. The archive room was dim, quiet, its lights controlled by pull cords that clicked like time capsules unlocking. She ran her fingers along labels faded by decades, deeds, easements, agricultural tax exemptions. She pulled a leather-bound folder marked Wren Devereaux Trust, 1979, its spine dusty but intact. When she opened it, several slips of paper fluttered to the floor, handwritten notations, one dated in her grandmother's signature. But it was the stapled form near the back that stopped her. Section 5 Contingency Clause. Any sale or transfer must carry the active consent of Eliza May Wren. Beneficiary Type C, regardless of physical residence or role in trust. Her breath caught. "That's not a clause they'd want you to find," came a voice from the corner. She turned. Reed Marston leaned slightly against a file cabinet. A man built for silent rooms. His blazer was dark brown, sleeves rolled neatly. He held a thin manila folder in one hand and a paper cup in the other. "You reading over my shoulder?" she asked. "I was here for a water rights file. But you're reading something more interesting. Do I know you? We met. Briefly. You helped Delacroix draft his land use petition a few years ago. Eliza Wren, she offered, watching him closely.
I remember.
He stepped forward. Reed Marston. I clerked for Delacroix back when the fax machine still jammed every other hour. She didn't extend her hand. What are you doing now? Estate law. Quiet cases. Dead people with secrets. His smile didn't ask for approval. She turned back to the document. This says I still have veto power. It does. They used my name without asking. Now I learn. I could have blocked the entire thing. He nodded. Technically, the moment they submitted paperwork with your forged consent, they triggered a breach. And if you challenge it, the sale freezes. She sat on a bench near the wall, the trust document trembling slightly in her hands. They called me irrelevant, that I removed myself. Reed crouched beside her, not intruding. Trust. Law doesn't care about family dynamics. It cares about what's on paper. And this paper says they can't do a damn thing without you. A long breath escaped her. Her mind flipped through the conversations of the past week like index cards, Clay's cold stare, Breyer's dismissive tone, the quiet click of the porch swing. Why didn't anyone tell me? She murmured. They didn't want you to know. Upstairs, the courthouse bell chimed once. Noon. She stood slowly, her knees steadying beneath her. Do you want help? Reed asked. I want clarity. You've got it. He gestured to the trust. This clause makes you the only person whose name actually matters. Later, they sat across from each other at Luella's diner. The same waitress from that morning raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Eliza ordered black coffee again, and when the check came, she slid another $5 beneath the mug without ceremony. Reed stirred his drink, not touching the sugar. They'll push back. I know. They might go public. Let them, she said. Two older men at the booth behind her nodded as they stood to leave. One tipped his hat wordlessly, the kind of acknowledgement that didn't require a name. Reed leaned forward just slightly. You want to stop them? She met his eyes. I want to remind them whose name they erased. The envelope was wax-sealed and brittle. The handwriting. Grandma May's, steady as ever. Eliza turned it over slowly, the light from the courthouse parking lot catching the deep green of the wax. Her name was written across the front, in pen, not marker in a cursive she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. The curves of each letter still carried a kind of sturdy affection. She didn't open it there. Instead, she slid the envelope between the pages of the trust folder and drove in silence. Delacroix's old office sat at the edge of town above a bait and tackle shop that had gone through 4 owners and 2 floods. The stairs creaked under her steps, and the key Reed had given her turned easily in the lock. Inside it smelled of dust and old legal pads, the scent of intention long after the clients had gone. The desk was bare, but for a brass lamp and a small cardboard box marked, "To be opened by Eliza May Wren." Only. She peeled back the lid, inside a single manila folder, and beneath it, tucked in linen paper, the letter. She broke the seal. The first page was in Delacroix's careful typing. Dear Eliza, if you're reading this, the Wren Ranch has become complicated. I knew it would. Your grandmother anticipated it before I did. She wanted you to have this when her land faced trouble. Enclosed is her letter in her own hand and a notarized addendum to the original, Wren Devereaux Trust, filed, sealed, and silently waiting. Your grandmother insisted you never needed to be asked, only informed. What the others don't know is that Wren Devereaux still holds equity rights to an oil venture from 1982. That venture failed until it didn't. A few bad years then. The field produced in 2019. Profits rolled into a blind trust. You, Eliza, are the legal and sole heir. As of today, that account holds approximately $48 million. If you choose to act, you can or not. It was never about the money to May. It was about memory and what people do with it.
Delacroix, her breath stilled. She turned to the second page. Eliza girl, if they're trying to sell this place, I trust you've already felt the ache before the paperwork. Don't let them confuse silence with absence. You've always been my sharp one, my listener, the one who saw roots before branches. You get this letter because I watched how you stayed quiet when others spoke too loud, how you planted without needing applause. You don't owe them drama. You owe yourself the choice to keep what matters. Legacy ain't about who shouts. It's about who shows up when it's hard to be kind. This land isn't your future. It's your mirror, Grandma. May Eliza sat back in the desk chair, the old vinyl sighing beneath her. The letter trembled in her hands. She hadn't cried at the hearing. Not when they sold her bedroom furniture without asking. Not when Breyer cut her out of the wedding photos, but now alone and unwatched. Her chest caved slightly. She didn't weep. It was quieter than that. Her chin dropped to her collarbone, and her hands covered her eyes. The sound she made wasn't grief. It was release. The sun had dipped low by the time she pulled into the Wren Ranch. The gravel crackled under her tires, the porch swing barely visible in the amber wash of twilight. She didn't go inside. Instead, she walked around the back to where the pecan trees stood. Years ago. Grandma May had handed her a spade and said, "Dig deep enough to see what the last hand left." They'd planted saplings there, just the two of them. Someone had built a shed over that space since, but the trees had grown crooked, leaning toward the memory anyway. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small photo. It had slipped between the letter pages. In it, she and Grandma May were knee-deep in dirt, one sapling between them, both. Mid-laugh. She hadn't known the photo existed, but there it was. Back in town, she parked across from the library. The lights were still on, open late on Thursdays. Mrs. Templeton stood behind the counter, sorting returns. "Well now," the older woman said, adjusting her glasses. "I was wondering when you'd come back through those doors. I found something I didn't know I was missing." "Eliza," replied. Mrs. Templeton nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "I held on to a copy of something for you. Thought maybe you'd like it again one day." She bent behind the desk and came up with a thin, cloth-bound book, The Giving Porch, its title still embossed in gold, though the corners had worn soft. "You used to read this to the elementary kids in the back room," the librarian said. "Every Thursday, without fail." Eliza took the book gently. "Some kids don't forget kindness even when it's quiet." Later that night, seated at her kitchen table with the photo and the letters spread before her, Eliza drafted the message with calm precision. No extra words. No apologies. To Breyer Wren at Foundation Mail. Come CC. Buyer Law, Stone Group. Come subject formal objection filed. You no longer have my permission. Documentation attached. Breyer had a talent for turning bad headlines into branding opportunities, especially when Eliza wasn't around to contradict them. The flyer landed in Eliza's inbox, with no subject line forwarded from a name she didn't recognize. It had the polish of a wedding invitation cursive, overlays a pale lavender border, and a golden W pressed into the corner. At the top, in bold serif legacy women, a family rooted in giving. Below it, the date, location, and image of the Wren Ranch lawn adorned in florals and rented archways, and centered smiling with modest poise was Breyer. Eliza stared at it in silence. Then she leaned back in Reed's office chair, letting the document settle between the edges of his lamp's warm yellow glow.
She's hosting it on the property, Reed asked from the bookshelf. Eliza nodded once. Without permission.
You want to send a cease and desist?
She shook her head. Let her speak. Reed paused, one brow lifting. You planning to sit quietly in the crowd? No, I'm planning to remind people who's missing from the photo. Later that day, Aunt Maribel dropped by unannounced, coat draped over her arm, the scent of rosemary clinging to her. She didn't ask questions or make apologies. She simply extended a plain manila folder toward Eliza across the kitchen table. May gave this to me. Told me it wasn't to be handed over until you'd stood on your own spine. Her words. Inside, Eliza found a copy of the earliest deed to the Wren Devereaux property, dated 1968, scrawled along the margin in her grandmother's handwriting. Future inheritance to pass through Eliza May Wren, contingent upon truth prevailing. It was a Tuesday when the tents went up. From the road, the Wren Ranch looked like it was preparing for a gala. White folding chairs pressed into soft ground, their legs already beginning to tilt in the uneven soil. 2 floral arches framed the back of the house, with draped fabric floating like chiffon sails in the breeze. At the end of the gravel path, a modest podium had been set flanked by potted chrysanthemums and a banner reading Wren Legacy Weekend. Briar arrived in a cream blazer and matching heels, her hair in a smooth twist, makeup just enough to register on camera, but not so much as to feel insincere. She greeted donors with soft hands and practiced half hugs. The local paper's photographer snapped shots of her, chatting with a retired school principal, a church committee leader, and a couple from the Bourne Arts Guild. Eliza didn't arrive until 15 minutes into the event. She didn't park in the gravel lot out front, instead leaving her car just outside the old pecan line entering through the back gate. She wore a charcoal sweater, clean jeans, and her grandmother's scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Aunt Maribel stood under the edge of the tent, arms crossed unreadable. Reed hovered near the back with a clipboard, not officially involved, but unmistakably present. Briar took the podium, glancing at her note cards. When I think of legacy, she began, I think of unity, of stewardship, of how our family has always pulled together in service of community. The words were smooth, measured, deftly false. She continued listing names, stories, and generations of Wren women working in quiet strength. Eliza wasn't mentioned, not once. A few heads turned when Eliza stepped onto the lawn, but no one stopped her. She moved quietly through the aisle, stopping near the second row. The podium wavered briefly in Briar's peripheral vision. Eliza waited. Briar saw her, hesitated, then forced a smile and turned back to the crowd. And with this gathering, we honor those who built this place and those who will carry it forward, together. She gestured behind her as if inviting applause. Eliza stepped forward, pulling from her bag the original trust document. She raised it just enough for those seated nearby to see the seal. This property, she said, voice clear and even, cannot be transferred without my consent. Briar's smile cracked, then held, and my name used without it ends here. There was no yelling, no gasps, just silence. Briar's fingers tightened around her notes. She folded them carefully too slowly and stepped back from the mic. One of the reporters near the edge of the tent tapped on her phone. A second later, the buzz of devices followed. From somewhere behind the audio equipment, the local journalist muttered to herself before typing into her feed. Silent air speaks truth, just upstaged PR. The story starts to spread beyond. Born. Eliza had never needed her name to be known. She just needed it to be respected. The offer came in a heavy envelope, with her name embossed on the front in silver foil. Inside, printed on thick cream stock, was the kind of language designed to sound reasonable A proposed resolution from the buyer's legal team formally offering a payout in exchange for her withdrawal from all property claims, plus a silent donation to any foundation of her choosing. It read like a handshake with a glove on, generous, impersonal, and meant to disappear. She set it on Reed's desk without comment. He didn't touch it either.
"They want your name gone from the paper trail," he said after a beat. "They already tried that," she replied.
"You planned to respond." "I already did." She slid a small envelope across the table, addressed to Ms. Tran at the buyer's firm. Her handwriting was tight, measured. The message inside: "No, thank you." Outside, the first leaves had started to curl and fall. In earnest, Bourne's sidewalks shimmered with afternoon warmth, but the air hinted at a season ready to shift. Eliza pulled her cardigan tighter as she passed the window of the Thanksgiving-themed bakery downtown. Painted pumpkins and paper leaves hung from string in the display. She stepped inside. A bell jingled, and the familiar scent of molasses and browned butter wrapped around her like memory. The same woman behind the counter still wore her apron stitched with baker's rise. Early Aunt Maribel was already seated in the corner, a slice of molasses pie before her, and a second one, untouched. She didn't speak at first, just pushed the extra plate forward. "I didn't ask you here for pie," Eliza said, though she took a bite. "No," Maribel said, "but I brought something besides crust." She handed over a narrow envelope, thinner than Delacroix's bearing, Eliza's name in that same determined cursive. "Grandma May's." Eliza unfolded it slowly. Inside was not a letter this time, but a photocopy of a handwritten addendum to the original land record signed and witnessed. The ink had bled just slightly in the corners from years of being tucked in fabric. At the bottom, in May's voice: "Entrust this property to Eliza May Wren. If and when the land is threatened by hands that seek profit over memory, let her protect what grew before her. No ceremony, no emotion, just legal clarity, written in love's tone." "I thought you should file that," Maribel said, her voice soft. Eliza nodded. "I will." She visited the ranch alone that evening, walking the edges of the property, beneath a sky dimming to soft orange. The pecan trees stood like elders, tall and blunt against the breeze. One had lost a limb in last year's storm and never recovered its jagged edge, still visible against the fence line. She sat beneath another, palms pressed to the ground. No tears came, just the rhythm of her breath matching the rustle of leaves. She didn't hear Grant's car pull up, but she heard the door shut. He walked toward her, slowly, hands in his coat pockets, like a man trying to look casual. He stood a few paces back, unsure. "You always liked this spot," he said. She didn't look at him. "Listen, I know things got out of hand. The sale wasn't personal. We just thought." She rose slowly, brushing the dirt from her jeans. "You didn't think you acted." He offered a tired shrug. "Maybe we start over." "Reset." She met his eyes and smiled, not kindly. "That would require you to start." He blinked, unsure how to answer. She stepped past him and didn't look back. The next morning, she stood before the clerk at the Bourne County Recorder's office with the petition in hand. It was crisp signed, notarized, and backed by both the original trust and May's addendum. It requested the formal protection of the Wren Ranch as community legacy land, barring sale development or transfer outside its designated purpose. She signed the final line carefully, the pen moving with steady weight. Eliza May Wren, trustee of the Wren Devereaux legacy. Outside the courthouse, the sun had warmed the front steps. Reed was waiting beside his truck, arms folded, his sleeves pushed past his elbows. He didn't ask if it went through. He didn't have to. He simply said, "Now what?" She smiled faintly, slipping on her grandmother's scarf. The pattern faded, but warm against her throat. Now we make it useful. Some inherit mansions. Eliza inherited responsibility and a pair of gardening gloves. The sun rose slowly over Bourne, its soft gold light spilling across the Wren Ranch like a quiet apology. By mid-morning, the lawn was a patchwork of folding tables, autumn leaves, and rust-colored pie tins stacked in neat rows. A banner stretched between two pecan trees read, "Pie and Papers, Day. Legal help. Sweet crusts and community roots." Eliza moved quietly between booths, her gloves tucked in her back pocket, a stack of pamphlets in her hands. She didn't wear anything special, just jeans, a chambray shirt, and the same scarf that had once belonged to Grandma May, its floral pattern faded to near memory. A table near the front offered coffee in paper cups, and Mrs. Templeton was already there, ladling cider from a crock-pot, the steam curling gently around her silver hair. Brought the book, she called to Eliza, with a wink. On a nearby picnic blanket, 3 kids took turns reading pages aloud from The Giving Porch, voices wobbling in rhythm, mispronouncing words with the confidence only children possess. Behind them, the old barn had been swept clean and repurposed for quiet consultations, tenant rights, elder care documents, wills drawn without fee. Reed stood near the corner booth, surrounded by laminated flowcharts and free pens. He talked estate planning with a retired postal worker and her niece. Eliza passed behind him, brushing a speck of flour from his shoulder. Without breaking stride, Aunt Maribel arrived, carrying a cardboard box and a modest plaque wrapped in brown paper. She waited until the crowd thinned to approach Eliza. "This came anonymously," she said. "The box was left at the back door of the library this morning." Inside were hand-carved wooden letters and a brass plate affixed to a cedar frame. Eliza peeled back the paper. Legacy kept not in bloodlines but in kindness. Her throat tightened. "Did you?" "No," Maribel said. "But I know who did." Before Eliza could ask, a black SUV rolled up the gravel path, glossy and out of place. A small TV crew climbed out 2 cameras, a sound tech, and Breyer in a pale blue blouse. Lips painted to match. She stepped onto the grass like she had a right to it, offering a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I heard there was a story happening here," she said. "To no one in particular." Eliza walked toward her calmly. "You're welcome to film." Breyer blinked, but only in the areas marked. "And no interviews without consent." The word consent landed harder than it should have. Breyer gave a small nod and drifted toward the pie table, camera trailing behind like a shadow on command. Later, as the light began to lean into late afternoon, Eliza stepped up to a small wooden platform someone had fashioned out of 2 hay bales and a porch step. She cleared her throat, not for attention, but for steadiness. A hush gathered. "This land stands today," she began, "because of one woman who taught me not to sell what people fear and not to fear what others try to sell." No one applauded. They didn't need to. The silence held more than enough weight. The crowd slowly dispersed. Pies wrapped in foil forms, in hand voices low and warm. Reed began stacking chairs. Children scattered toward the back fence, chasing shadows. Near the mailbox, long rusted and leaning, Eliza knelt with a wrench. She unbolted it slowly, then replaced it with a new one she had brought in her trunk. The cedar was unvarnished, but sturdy. On the side she had etched one name, Wren. The wind picked up rustling, dry oak leaves across the grass. Same sound as the porch in late September. She closed her eyes. listened behind her. A woman in a navy dress approached, badge clipped to her coat. "Ms. Wren?" she asked. Eliza stood brushing soil from her hands. "We're looking to fund community land trusts. Do you have a few minutes?" Eliza smiled. In a town where legacies were once measured in headlines and handshakes, Eliza chose something quieter, soil under her nails, names spoken with care, and a mailbox bearing truth. Her strength was never in volume but in presence, and through stillness she reclaimed what others tried to erase. Sometimes kindness doesn't arrive with fanfare. It shows up in old deeds, in passed-down recipes, in standing firm when it would be easier to walk away. Because when we stop judging others by what's visible, we finally begin to see what's lasting. Maybe today, a small act, a letter, a pie, a patient answer might be the beginning of someone else's restoration. And perhaps, like Eliza, we'll discover that the softest steps leave the deepest roots.